In March of 2011, a company with 0 users, 0 revenue, and an app nobody outside the building had ever tried announced it had raised $41 million. Not from unknown investors chasing a fad. From Sequoia Capital, the firm behind Google and Apple. From Bain Capital, from Silicon Valley Bank. Before a single stranger had downloaded the app. Professional investors had already decided it was going to be one of the most important companies of the decade. 19 months later, it was gone. Not bankrupt in some dramatic public collapse. Just quietly acquired by Apple for a fraction of what it raised. Its product shut down. Its name reduced to a cautionary footnote in Silicon Valley history. The company was called Color, and the strange part of this story isn't that it failed. Plenty of funded startups fail, quietly every single year. The strange part is that the actual idea behind Color, stripped of all the hype that eventually buried it, was genuinely years ahead of anything else running on a smartphone at the time. The company came from Bill Nguyen, a serial entrepreneur who had already sold one company, a music service called Lala, to Apple back in 2009. He assembled 6 co-founders around him, including Peter Pham, a veteran of Photo Bucket, and DJ Patil, who had previously been LinkedIn's chief scientist. On paper, this wasn't some group of first-time founders chasing a passing trend. This was as close to a proven, credentialed team as Silicon Valley could realistically assemble in one room. In December of 2010, the team bought the domain Colorcom for $350,000. By March of 2011, before the app had shipped to a single outside user, Sequoia Capital's Mike Moritz sat through one demo and committed $25 million within 24 hours, putting partner Doug Leone directly on Color's board that same week. Nguyen later described Sequoia telling him they hadn't felt this kind of excitement about a company since Google itself. The same firm that had turned a modest early bet on that search engine into one of the greatest venture returns in history. Bain Capital added another $9 million. Silicon Valley Bank added $7 million more in venture debt. The total came to $41 million, reportedly more than Sequoia had put into Google at a comparable stage, raised entirely on the strength of a demo and a founding team's reputation, for a product that had not yet touched a single real user's hands. So what was Color actually supposed to do? Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting. Because underneath all the money and the noise, the core idea was legitimately clever. Color didn't ask you to add friends. It didn't rely primarily on GPS, which at the time was neither precise nor battery-friendly enough for what they wanted. Instead, the app used a combination of sensors already sitting inside any smartphone. The compass, the gyroscope, multiple microphones, and the ambient light sensor, to calculate probabilistically whether 2 phones were physically close to each other, roughly within about 150 feet. If they were, whatever photos or videos either person captured became instantly visible to everyone else nearby running the app. No request, no approval, no friending required at any point. Walk into a restaurant, and you'd automatically start seeing photos other Color users nearby had just taken. And they'd see yours in return. Nguyen described the effect as scattering disposable cameras across a wedding. Except everyone's camera was already sitting in their pocket, permanently switched on. Strip away the hype, and that's a strikingly accurate preview of ideas that would eventually work. Years later, wearing completely different branding. Ephemeral, location-triggered. Friendless sharing is essentially the core mechanic behind apps like Snapchat's Snap Map and Be Real, both of which arrived long after Color had already come and gone. The sensor fusion approach to proximity detection, leaning on ambient light and audio signatures instead of relying purely on GPS, was the kind of engineering most competitors weren't seriously attempting yet in 2011. Color wasn't chasing an idea nobody would ever want. It was simply 5 to 10 years early, launched into a smartphone ecosystem, a network infrastructure, and a user base that wasn't remotely ready to make it work. The launch itself is where everything went wrong, and it went wrong fast. On March 23, 2011, Color shipped for iPhone, with Android following that same night. The interface confused people almost immediately, offering no clear explanation of what you were even looking at or why. No obvious reason to keep the app open once the initial curiosity wore off, and, critically, the entire concept depended on having a real critical mass of nearby users to function at all. A proximity-based photo network is worthless if you happen to be the only person running it within 150 feet. At launch, with a tiny, scattered user base spread across an entire country. That's almost exactly what happened, over and over in city after city. Reviews on iTunes crashed to 2 stars within days of release. Nguyen didn't help his own case either. In interviews explaining the app, he dismissed existing photo-sharing competitors as insignificant compared to what Color was supposedly building. Comments that read very differently once you already know how this particular story ends. Around that same period, reports surfaced that Google had privately offered somewhere around $200 million to acquire Color before it had even publicly launched. The offer was declined. Whatever Color's team believed they were sitting on, they believed it was worth holding onto rather than cashing out early. It wasn't. Within months, the cracks became public. Co-founder Peter Pham left the company entirely in June of 2011. That October, at Facebook's F8 developer conference, roughly 6 months after publicly calling Facebook fundamentally broken and predicting the entire company wouldn't survive the shift to mobile, Nguyen unveiled a quietly pivoted version of Color that now pulled photos directly from users' existing Facebook friends. An almost complete reversal of the friendless premise he'd built the entire company around just months before. Behind that pivot sat a second, unreleased project internally called Blue. Another attempt to find some version of the original idea people would actually stick with. It never shipped either. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling even faster than the public pivots suggested. A lawsuit later filed by a former executive alleged Nguyen had used company funds on personal expenses, including payments to a nanny and a ski instructor, and described a work environment employees found increasingly hostile as the company's fortunes declined. Before his relationship with Color's own board had even fully collapsed, Nguyen had reportedly already begun quietly building prototype apps of his own, using the company's engineering resources, specifically to demonstrate to Apple executives as a potential exit. Effectively shopping around the very company he was still supposed to be running full-time. By October of 2012, Color's shutdown was confirmed. Apple acquired what remained, primarily the team and the underlying sensor technology, rather than the product itself, in a deal reportedly worth around $7 million. A staggering markdown from the $41 million raised less than 2 years earlier. The app was discontinued entirely. The original vision, an ambient, location-aware social layer sitting quietly on top of everyday life, never got a genuine second chance to prove whether it could have eventually worked. Color's failure gets filed correctly as one of Silicon Valley's most extreme cautionary tales about hype outrunning substance. A company that raised world-class money on a single demo and a founder's reputation, then imploded before ever proving it could hold a single user's attention for more than a few days. But the underlying technology it was chasing was never really the problem. Proximity-based sharing, ambient sensor fusion, ephemeral location-triggered content. Every one of those specific ideas eventually found a real audience. In other products built by other teams, years later, once phones, networks, and user habits had actually caught up to what Color tried to ship all the way back in 2011. The $41 million didn't buy Color a bad idea. It bought a genuinely good idea that nobody involved, including the people building it, had figured out how to deliver in time for anyone to actually want it yet. End of line, technology that almost changed everything. Subscribe and check out the rest of the channel. New stories of technology that almost changed everything. Going up every day.